China is building on previously unoccupied features in these disputed waters.
China has sovereignty of the national islands, including reef and its adjacent waters. Leave immediately and keep off.
Despite the fact that it is building these islands, it's building them on top of reefs which don't exert territorial sovereignty.
As you look at the map of the South China Sea, a vast expanse of ocean stretching over 3.5 million square kilometres, it's hard not to feel a sense of awe. But behind all this lies a potential powder keg, a place that could spark a catastrophic war, much like Hitler's invasion of Polish territory in World War II. The stakes are high and tensions are rising as China continues to assert its dominance over the sea, breaking international laws and agreements and encroaching upon the territories of neighbouring nations. With 7 states surrounding it, including Taiwan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia and Vietnam, the South China Sea is one of the most strategically significant regions in the world and a vital sea line of communication, making it the most commonly travelled route for ships around the world. But China's aggressive territorial expansion and its blatant disregard for international laws have raised concerns about its intentions. Is China preparing to launch an attack on multiple nations simultaneously? And if so, what could be the consequences of such actions? As tensions continue to rise, the world watches and wonders, hoping that this time history won't repeat itself. So come along with us in today's video as we uncover China's strategy to simultaneously attack 5 nations. Over the past decade, the South China Sea issue has captured the world's attention, with China making significant changes to underwater reefs, transforming them into islands complete with airfields, roads, buildings, and missile system bases. These actions have made the South China Sea one of the most hotly contested waterways in the world, with China converting 7 reefs into military sites in just 2 years. In fact, some US Army analysts are concerned that these islands could be the spark that ignites World War III, citing China's reluctance to respect the borders of neighbouring nations as a primary reason. It's a tense situation that has the potential to reshape the geopolitical landscape of the entire world. To grasp the complexity of the situation, you must understand why the South China Sea holds such great importance to the world, why China is so desperate to gain control over it, and why the US needs to intervene. Despite being just one of the many seas in the world, the South China Sea is constantly in the spotlight. So let's dive into why China is constantly fighting with neighbouring nations over this region. First, let's explore what makes the South China Sea so significant for China and the rest of the world. The South China Sea is a small yet vital body of water that is bordered by countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and Taiwan. Despite concerns over declining fish stocks, it is estimated to hold at least 28 billion barrels of oil, 266 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and a third of the world's marine biodiversity. This alone makes it a crucial part of the ecosystem. But that's not all. The South China Sea is also a major trade route. In fact, in 2019 alone, $3.37 trillion worth of global trade went through this region. The Strait of Malacca and the South China Sea serve as the primary ports of call for ships traveling to and from the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Given that China heavily depends on oil imports, with nearly 50% of its oil coming from the Middle East, it's no surprise that this region plays such a vital role in the country's economy. China's status as the world's manufacturing powerhouse means that it relies on exporting goods to other countries to drive its economic growth. The South China Sea is a crucial link in this chain, as it serves as a major route for China's exports to reach the rest of the world. It's no secret that China values the South China Sea, but does this mean they actually own it? You will get the answer to this question very soon. You see, the South China Sea is home to a diverse range of marine life due to nutrient-rich water from the land and upwelling in certain areas of the ocean. However, this abundance is heavily fished and provides the primary source of animal protein for the densely populated Southeast Asian region. Along with fish, substantial oil and gas reserves have been discovered beneath the South China Sea, making it a hotspot for hydrocarbon production. In addition, the South China Sea is a vital shipping route for global trade, with the Strait of Malacca and the South China Sea serving as primary pathways to and from ports in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Although there are some poorly sounded areas, the South China Sea is generally considered safe for shipping. However, territorial disputes involving the Spratly Islands, which are shared by several countries including China, have led to tensions in the region and the categorization of the islands as a dangerous zone due to their location in an oil-rich area. But why is China getting all the blame for the territorial dispute in the South China Sea? Let's take a look at it in a family context. Imagine a family feud over an inherited property. The siblings would usually come to an agreement and put laws in place to maintain peace and prevent any disputes. Similarly, China and some other countries agreed to peaceful coexistence years ago. As per the Law of the Sea, signed in a UN convention in 1982, each country's territorial waters extend up to 12 nautical miles, which is around 22 kilometers from its coast. Beyond this zone, foreign vessels are allowed innocent passage, and coastal countries can establish an exclusive economic zone, EEZ, extending up to 200 nautical miles, or about 370 kilometers from shore. Within the EEZ, the coastal state can exploit and regulate fisheries, construct artificial islands, and use the area for other economic purposes. All countries, including China, have acknowledged and accepted this law. However, China seems to be reneging on the agreement. While there are overlaps in the claims of Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and the Philippines, these countries are united against China's claim. China has come up with a made-up 9-dash line covering almost 90% of the South China Sea, which they claim is now part of China. This claim amounts to practically taking the whole sea for themselves. So China's insistence on following this 9-dash line instead of the Law of the Sea has put them in hot water. Have you ever wondered why China lays claim to most of the South China Sea with their 9-dash line, despite the lack of legal or historical evidence to support it? Surprisingly, there are no international laws or agreements that officially recognize it. Yet the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, claims that it belongs to China. Their reasoning? They believe that a Chinese explorer discovered the area centuries ago, and therefore it rightfully belongs to China. This bold claim has caused tensions and confrontation with other countries involved in the dispute. In response, some parties have renamed regions with their jurisdiction in an attempt to solidify their claim. However, while all this was happening, the CCP went a step further and began building military-grade islands in the area, complete with troops and a missile defense system. Due to their close proximity to the Philippines, China was taken to the UN court by the Philippines for their aggressive actions. In 2016, The Hague made a ruling in favor of the Philippines, stating that China had encroached on their territory. But China was clearly unhappy with the decision and disregarded it entirely. To make matters worse, they declared that any aircraft passing through the area would require Chinese approval, effectively designating the airspace over the disputed land as a defensive air identification zone. Despite their assurances that this was for defensive purposes only, it only served to worsen relations between the two countries. The Spratly Islands, a group of islands located in the middle of the South China Sea, have also contributed to tensions between neighbouring countries. Everyone is trying to gain control of them because doing so allows them to expand their exclusive economic zone and claim a larger portion of the South China Sea. However, in a 2016 ruling, the islands were declared to be mere rocks, which means they don't extend any country's exclusive economic zone. This ruling took away some of the island's importance and helped to reduce tensions between nations vying for control over them. Although the 2016 ruling on the Spratly Islands may have eased tensions in the South China Sea, the conflict is far from over. China has resorted to a sneaky tactic known as the cabbage strategy, or salami slicing, to slowly cut off supplies to foreign-controlled islands. This involves surrounding an island with its ships and destroyers to prevent other countries from accessing it before ultimately claiming it for itself. However, the United States, with its powerful navy and many allies, is determined to preserve maritime stability and ensure uninterrupted global trade. The US Navy has increased its presence in the South China Sea in response to China's aggressive behavior, which jeopardizes the United States' commitment to freedom of the seas. This dedication promotes security and prosperity, guarantees fair access to resources, reduces naval tensions, and stabilizes global trade. Are you ready to dive into the accusations leveled against China in the South China Sea conflict? Well, according to Western authorities, China is intensifying its efforts to claim disputed territory in one of the world's most economically and commercially important regions. They allege that China is rapidly developing uninhabited land features, such as reefs and islands, and even militarizing them by building ports, runways, and other facilities. In fact, these authorities claim that China is the first country to do so on territory that it does not already possess. While it's still unclear whether China intends to use these developments for military purposes, they warn that it could signal a move towards a new status quo in the region. Unnamed officials who want to keep their identities private to protect sensitive intelligence claim that China has been conducting construction activities on uninhabited land features in the Spratly Islands. The officials allege that Chinese-controlled fishing fleets have been acting as maritime militias and have grown sandbars and other structures in the region by over 10 times their previous size in the past decade. The officials revealed that the new land formations have emerged above water and point to Eldad Reef, which now has massive holes, debris heaps, and excavator tracks. They also claim that Panata Island and Lankium Cay have undergone similar actions, with new surrounding walls and physical alterations at Whitsun Reef and Sandy Cave. The officials have even presented images of Chinese marine vessels unloading amphibious hydraulic excavators for land reclamation efforts. These activities have raised concerns about China's territorial ambitions and the potential impact on maritime stability in the region. China's foreign ministry in Beijing dismissed the allegations made against them, calling them completely fabricated. However, the Philippine Foreign Ministry issued a statement stating that any construction activity by China on uninhabited land features would be a breach of agreements between Beijing and Southeast Asian countries on how to conduct themselves in disputed waters. The 2016 ruling by an international tribunal also found China's claims to be baseless. The 9-dash line on a 1947 map is the basis of China's claim to about 90% of the South China Sea. Despite increasing investments in naval and coast guard ships to enforce its claims, tension between China and other claimants like the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam have been escalating for years. The Spratly Islands' significance has increased due to their proximity to a busy shipping lane and potential military uses, particularly in the event of a regional conflict involving Taiwan. Several nations in the region have upped their defense spending and launched reclamation initiatives in response to China's actions. Vietnam has escalated its dredging and landfill operations on many Spratly Islands, while the Philippines expressed its dismay over Chinese ships crowding 2 reefs close to Reed Bank, where the 2 nations have discussed collaborating on oil and gas exploration. Last year, the Philippines assembled ships near Whitsun Reef, 175 nautical miles, 324 kilometers to the west of the country, after more than 200 Chinese militia vessels were detected using a similar swarming tactic. Even prior to the recent escalation in hostilities, Beijing and Southeast Asian countries agreed to a non-binding code of conduct in 2002, urging the parties to refrain from inhabiting the now unoccupied reefs, islands, shoals, caves, and other structures. While states continue to focus on recovering from the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, security threats to the current international system persist. China has put into effect the Maritime Traffic Safety Law, MTSL, which states that foreign vessels entering Chinese territorial waters must inform the authorities, have the necessary permits, and comply with Chinese command and control. In February, China passed a new law allowing the Chinese Coast Guard, CCG, to use force against foreign vessels that violate Chinese sovereignty. However, these laws not only affect the global order, but also violate the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, which grants the right of innocent passage with prior consent from the coastal state's government. China's actions appear to undermine international laws as they pass laws that violate international law and infringe on the sovereignty of other nations. For more than 30 years, China has been expanding its jurisdiction in the disputed waters. The 1992 Law on the Territorial Sea and Contiguous Zone, which included Article 6 stating that foreign military ships must obtain permission from the government of the People's Republic of China to enter its territorial sea, raised concerns among other nations whose interests were at stake. This law also violated the UNCLOS regulations for measuring the territorial sea and other marine zones. China has used the straight baseline technique, which involves establishing baselines between a group of islands situated far from its shore. By doing so, China has extended its territorial sea in the Exclusive Economic Zone, EEZ, beyond what is allowed by UNCLOS, and has violated the rights of other countries to exploit those waters as permitted by international law. To further its territorial objectives at the expense of neighbouring states' territory and sovereignty, Chinese internal legislation provides it with the opportunity to use coercive measures, which goes beyond what is allowed by international law. For example, the Coast Guard's Law Article 12, passed in February, gives the CCG the power to safeguard Chinese maritime interests, artificial islands, infrastructure, and construction in waters that China claims as its own. Additionally, Article 20 authorises the CCG to destroy foreign-built structures, floating objects, and islands under its control. The MTSL also gives China the authority to regulate activities in its waters by establishing the types of foreign vessels that must report their information when navigating and berthing in pilotage zones. The unclear pilotage zones in the MTSL have caused concern among competing claimants in the South China Sea. China's claim over the majority of the South China Sea has been further strengthened by the Maritime Traffic Safety Law, MTSL, which allows them to establish pilotage zones in disputed areas and even within the exclusive economic zones of other claimants. As part of China's three warfare policy, they are actively using legal measures to protect their national interests without resorting to physical conflict. This strategy was officially incorporated in their long-term game plan in 2003. The MTSL and Coast Guard law are not just violations of international law, but also support China's territorial claims by deploying their own legal system. The ambiguity of these laws gives China the flexibility to interpret them as needed. The new maritime law's application remains unclear, especially with regards to the geographical area covered by it. China's ambition to be a leader in the region, in addition to being a permanent member of the UN Security Council, means that their actions have a significant impact on the global order. China is actively working to reshape maritime norms and laws by creating their domestic legislation, and this will have far-reaching implications. It can be argued that the recently passed Coast Guard law is an immediate threat to other nations involved in disputes with China in the East and South China Seas. By imposing stricter regulations on foreign ships, China is effectively creating a legal foundation to support its physical presence on the high seas. China's economic and military power enables it to enforce its domestic laws in areas that it claims, regardless of whether those areas are recognized as legally belonging to China. China has invested heavily in its naval fleet and has transformed its masked militia ships into formidable vessels, surpassing the capabilities of its neighbouring nations' warships and law enforcement agencies. With its military spending expected to soar to $350 billion in the coming years, it is not difficult for China to compel ships from smaller nations to comply with its new legislation. Now let's dive into China's cunning attack strategy, shall we? Back in 2014, China began constructing military islands in the South China Sea, within the borders of other nations. These fake islands have ports, air bases, and anti-aircraft weapons that are already primed for warfare. In the past 2 years, China has built 7 of these islands without the consent of other nations. It's clear that China is ready to attack if necessary, which is why many believe that these islands have the greatest potential to trigger World War III. The root of the problem lies in China's refusal to respect the borders of other nations. With China's military defense systems in place, it's obvious that they're prepared to go to war and threaten anyone who interferes. But if China can flout international law and claim land, what guarantees do we have that they'll abide by any other rules? And what's to stop other nations from following China's lead? The tension between the US and China is rising again due to the CCP's latest actions in the South China Sea, breaking its own promises and undermining efforts to settle disputes. Back in 2011, China, along with Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, Taiwan, and the Philippines, agreed on some preliminary rules to implement the South China Sea Declaration of Conduct to manage conflicts. The plan was to finish the Code of Conduct, or COC, by 2021, but unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Despite the COC's key provisions prohibiting any construction on uninhabited reefs, China has reportedly violated it by allowing fishing fleets to build on these features. One of these locations, El Dad Reef, has seen the emergence of new land formations above water in the past year, raising concerns about China's future intentions in the region. With Beijing's track record of disregarding international laws and agreements, it's hard to trust that they'll stick to any commitments. The situation is worrying and could have serious consequences for global peace and stability. If China manages to unseat the United States in the Western Pacific and takes over the South China Sea for good, the world's geopolitical landscape will be completely transformed. Southeast Asia will be at China's beck and call, and Australia's future will be uncertain as it finds itself isolated. Japan and Korea will face a dangerous new reality, with China controlling the seaborne life of both countries. The United States' ability to provide security assistance to its allies and partners will be severely undermined. India will no longer have free access to the South China Sea and most of Southeast Asia. Europe will have to rely on China as its gateway to Asia. All of this will happen in a region that is quickly becoming the center of the world economy. The message will be loud and clear. America's era of global dominance has come to an end, and a new superpower has risen.